So, welcome to Strange TV, where things get weird. We make furrowed eyebrows, sarcastic comments, witty jokes, commentary. I'm going to talk about comics I like, movies that we grew up with, comedy we all know and love, comedy we all know and hate, jokes of the week, comics who are on the rise, all that fun stuff. And then I'll have my buddy Zach weigh in with the art of comedy, the science of comedy, all that shit. If you want to get philosophical about comedy, he's our man. Sometimes he'll just fart and people will applaud. He's just one of those people. He's a magical specimen. So we're very happy to have him on the show. But today we're talking about Robin Williams, the man, the myth, the legend. There's a lot of sadness, of course, around his death. Affected us all. But I'd like to focus on the positive for this episode. Robin was one of those guys for me, especially that like you saw him and you're like, yeah, that's what comedy can be. It can go to that level of that eccentric, crazy madness, insanity. You know what I mean? Like at that level, he's painting with comedy. It's not just something it's not something he just rehearsed and planned or whatever. He got to a level where he could really paint with the colors of the wind, however you want to say it. He was in the zone. And I think that's comics like him, when you see him performing, even if you're not a comic, you can feel that energy and getting that level. And you're like, that's real. You can make it. You can get to that point. For me, he was one of those people that inspired me. Like, hey, this can be a very magical, awesome thing that anyone potentially could do. And so for me, that really kind of jump-started my whole love of comedy and entertainment and all that stuff. Obviously, he was in all those, Disney movies, voiced Aladdin, all that stuff. But also just like Hook, there's so many classics he was in.
Oh yeah, Miss Doubtfire,
Mrs. Doubtfire. Oh yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Inspired an entire generation. Convinced an entire generation of young men it was okay to cross-dress. I mean, this guy was left and right a killer. He was just, comedy and drama. He got into the heavy shit.
Dead Poets Society
podcast. So yeah, Dead Poets Society, love that stuff. And even in the drama stuff, he brought out, I thought, a comedic element, which was, you don't get that from a lot of people.
Well, I grew up watching Miss Doubtfire, and I think that's my favorite. I just rewatched it. It's on like Netflix, I think, or HBO or something like that. But Mrs. Doubtfire was like it was just such a, because the funniest part for me of that movie is when he's calling his ex-wife, to book maids, and because she wants to hire a maid because they get divorced or whatever, and he just goes into so many different voices and like it's crazy, and his range is very large. So I think that's what it's some of my favorite memories of Robin Williams is that. Good Morning Vietnam is also great.
Oh. That's
Robin Williams.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a great movie with him, and it's like drama and a comedy, and it's very good. So.
Well, and I think that's again why I think I liked him so much is because he could, even in the dramatic roles, you felt like the warmth and energy. To me as a performer, there was so much he would put out there that was like additional, that you felt like added to the role. It made it more human. It filled in the gaps. He didn't just look at a script or a scene or a character and go, it's just, I'm going to read it one-dimensionally and make sure I hit that. Like a lot of actors, I'm just going to fill the void of what's needed for the director in the scene and all that. For him, he was like, living in it. He was having fun with it. And I think a lot of people don't look at it that way who do it. A lot of people, it's just a job, or it's just going through the motions, or it's all technical. And I think the people like him who go to that next step with it, whether it's acting or stand-up, when you see that and recognize it, you realize like, oh, it's not just like this is art that we're doing, but like you can reach like a genius level with it. And I think that's what he did that kind of like wowed everybody, whether it was taking on the serious or the comedic. But even in the really serious ones, I felt like, and maybe it's because you associate with him after so many roles as Mr. Comedy, but there's so many serious roles too where like I felt like he the comedic element kind of seeped through, and then it added like another dimension to it.
Because I think in every Robin Williams movie, like with some actors, you're like, oh, they played this person in that movie. With Robin Williams, it's like, oh yeah, Robin Williams was in that movie, happened to play this character. Right. So I think that was, I don't know if that was intentional on his, or if he was just such a strong character in life just generally in life.
Yeah,
But I feel like a lot of the movies he's in revolves around him just being himself and playing a little bit of one of his mini characters in those movies.
exactly. It's like he's exploring one of the versions of him. And for me, I've always seen that acting is that. It's like even though this is something somebody else wrote and created and thought up and everything, that somehow there's something in it you can recognize in you is kind of a weird thing to me, but it's what makes acting and all that stuff very cool and exciting is that, and I totally agree. I think Ron Williams is one of those people where he probably saw more within, from his inner world, if you will, recognized aspects within himself, in comedy, in stories, in all these things, and then kind of would explore that when he got a role. I think he definitely went about it in that way. And it's more fun and I think more revealing to the actor when you do it that way, because then it's like a philosophical process. I think if you're acting right anyway, it should be, because you're asking questions like, do I agree with this mindset? And you're doing all these analytical processes to see, do they have a rationality essentially? And then sometimes it's
Right.
they don't have a rationality, and what's the motivation and all those things. So to me, acting, stories, even humor, all those things, if you do it right, it can be philosophically kind of enlightening. And he's definitely, I mean, you mentioned Dead Poet Society. There's a movie that had all those things. It had the drama, it had comedy, it had the philosophical elements, that was very intellectual and very, um, making a point about how the world works, and yet you felt like you were just watching an entertaining story. I mean, to me, whether it's a stand-up joke or a movie or whatever, that's the beauty of a well-crafted story, is that it can carry these little like precious gems that actually have like some truth to them or some weight to them, some gravitas. And to me, that's very cool, but also like, hey, why is that the way that is? And I think he's just one of those people that was plugged into, um, like I've always called it archetypes,
Hmm.
like if you do stand up or if you do any kind of performance, I feel like everybody has like a number of characters inside their mind that they're thinking of and they're pulling from. And I think he's definitely was one of those people where he was always pulling from that. And the kind of Carl Jungian way of looking at it is that there are all of these archetypes from stories and religious mythologies and all this stuff that like kind of creeps into our subconscious, and then we're inevitably gonna, be one of those archetypes essentially in the arc of your life or whatever. But then there's like guys like him that like I think could kind of, like, he had a higher intelligence with all those things and somehow could use that to like pull it into his work, like, oh, I've always had this idea of a crazy toothless madman who lives on the side of the road, and then all of a sudden one day he runs into a story or a funny moment to then use that character in that way. And even though it's insane and crazy and like what the fuck, it's what made him, you know, it was just part of his talent and his unique ability. So I've always been interested personally as somebody who's trying to act and do comedy and all these things, like where does that come from and how do you get better at it? But there's some people like him where it's just like this raw talent where they could somehow like, it's like they had an extra sixth sense and like just plug into like the weird ideas that were like right outside of the reach, to normal
Oh,
people.
right.
And
Yeah.
anyway, sorry, I know that's a lot of shit. I just went out, kind of word
No.
vomited there. But I do think there's something to that with people like him where they're at such a high level with their intuition that they probably don't even consciously know how they're doing it. Like I think with him, it probably he just like he could intuitively do it. It would land the laugh, and then he probably just kept doing that. I mean, I think that's how a lot of comedians go. I don't think a lot of them stop and think, "Hey, what's the science of this? How is this working?" They're just kind of like, "I fell into it, and I've just been, following my lead in my intuition." Yeah.
Well, I think that's kind of a general like genre of comedy and comedians is I think there's two broad categories of like the analytical comedian and the spontaneous comedian, right? And I think
Yeah.
that Robin Williams falls more on the spontaneous side because he did so many things. He was just so
Mm-hmm.
fast paced, and when he did something that was hilarious, which was a lot, it was like you had to think about, was that intentional or was he like playing out of the moment?
Right.
Was he just there or was it like? And I think, you know, and if it was planned out, he's a very good. He's even better. If it was planned out, he's even better than we give him credit for, because
Absolutely.
it seems so spontaneous.